Hi everyone. India has become a country so besieged by crises that we are unable to keep our attention on any one of them. Every week as a new crisis erupts, we lose sight of an older one. Over the past few weeks, as our focus has been on corruption and the ongoing coal scam, we've certainly lost sight of another extremely important and burning issue. What I'm talking about is the Land Acquisition Bill. The ongoing tussle within the UPA government and the cabinet over the form of this bill is nothing short of a scandal. Unfortunately, both the Prime Minister and some in his cabinet seem incapable of taking any policy decisions based on a strong and clear ethical principle. One would have thought that ever since 2007, when protest movements really erupted in Singur and Nandigram and have played themselves out endlessly across the country in places like Sompeta and Raigarh, Niyamgirhi, Bhatta Parsaul and innumerable other places, that at least the baseline rules of the game would have become clear. That if you covet something that others possess, the least you can do is ask nicely and pay fairly, and remember that they have the right to refuse. In a modern democracy, surely this can't be rocket science. It should be ordinary human logic. But unfortunately, that is not the case. Jairam Ramesh, the rural minister, at least attempted to correct some of the iniquities of the land acquisition bill. He tried to walk some way down this path. In the draft bill that he created, the first important thing he did was to rechristen it the right to compensation, rehabilitation and transparency in land acquisition. Given the fact that none of these were given, was even acknowledged as rights before, merely enshrining this language of rights was a very important step. There were other things that he had achieved. For instance, if land in rural areas is to be taken over either for public purpose or for industry, the going rate had to be 4 times the market rate. If it was to be in urban areas, it was to be twice the market rate. This was an important correction because we all know that the circle rate of land is much lower than the actual value of land. The other important thing that he achieved was to introduce the idea of social impact assessments. Also, that no project could begin unless sufficient compensation and rehabilitation had been implemented satisfactorily. The livelihood, the rights of livelihood, the tillers of land, whose rights had never been acknowledged earlier. These are people who do not own land, but who work the land, whose livelihoods depend upon it. For the first time, their rights were acknowledged. These were important correctives that the draft land bill that Jairam Ramesh came up with had achieved. Justifiably though, civil rights activists were very upset with Jairam Ramesh for having sold out. Importantly, the draft bill had failed to stringently define what public purpose is. This left it open to manipulation for private profit and for many other interpretations that could be put. Significantly also, 13 other acts, which include mining projects, SEZs, power projects, and many other big displacers, were inexplicably left out the purview of this act. And finally, rather than enshrining the right to consent, Jairam Ramesh had merely left it as consultation of the Gram Sabha. Still, despite the angry face-off between Ramesh and the civil rights activists, at least the framework of the argument was agreed upon. Jairam Ramesh agreed what the ideal was. The disagreement was over how quickly one can get there. He acknowledged that this bill was a compromise, that it had fallen short of his own best instincts, and that the Prime Minister had asked him to make it investor-friendly. And given the realities, the competing realities of India, politics is really the art of the possible, and he had done his best to marry these competing demands or find a balance between them. He also said that this bill should merely be valid for about 10 years before the circumstances and awareness levels on ground changes, and the bill should be made more liberal and progressive. However, last week, when this bill went to the cabinet for clearance, the opposition that Congress ministers put up to the bill was, as I've already said, nothing short of scandalous. Ministers like Kamal Nath and Anand Sharma resisted the bill on grounds that all these clauses were too inconvenient for industry or too cumbersome. And so they have asked for the social impact assessment to be dropped. They do not want projects to be held off till rehabilitation has been implemented, and they feel that the price of land is too high. The Prime Minister, unfortunately, instead of taking a strong stand and standing by the political promise that the Congress has made to bring a fair and equitable land acquisition bill, has typically deferred it to another group of ministers. Very often, the debate over the land acquisition bill is presented as an argument between factory and farm. This is not a fight between factory and farm. This is a fight between those who can think straight and those who can't. Yes, there are pragmatic issues, but all laws, all bills must first be written on the basis of fair principles. After that, the pragmatics of something can be ironed out. When we think back to the Constitution, please remember that we were a feudal and illiterate society. If our founding fathers had written the Constitution based on short-term pragmatic ideas, one shudders to think what is the Constitution we would have received. Because that was a soaring document, 65 years later, we are still protected by it, we live by the values that were enshrined in it, and the ongoing Land Acquisition Act is a scandal and a shame because our political leaders are not writing it based on fair principles. As I've already said, this is a fight between those who can think straight and those who can't. And if this bill is not correctly written, it will be a huge and historic opportunity that is lost. Thanks for listening in.